All right, well, Manso and Clay Ferraro, Miami Sports Pod game style. Clay, it was preseason. About 100 guys didn't play, including Tua Tagovailoa, but we got our taste of Mike McDaniel, first taste of his offense, the way he coaches. We'll get into the specifics because there were some things that we learned from the game against the Bucs, a 2-point dramatic last-second win. But overall, your first impressions were what?
Well, we learned that he is perfectly willing to ice a kicker in a preseason game. So
He knows it well.
I'm not sure the last time I saw that in a preseason game. Most of the time, coaches are ready to just get out of there.
Do it like in the game. Learn it now.
I would say this. I think the fact that you did not notice anything is probably a good thing, right? Because it's like if you got somebody who's coaching for the first time as a head coach, his first game, and there weren't any massive missteps. There didn't seem to be communication issues, which I think is the one thing that if you're not there, first time head coach, like it's really tough to know, okay, who's communicating the play. It's things like that. Like we're watching the product on the field, but so much goes into just making sure that the guys know what they're supposed to do. And there didn't seem to be any of those errors. And so I think for a head coach making his debut, the fact that you did not notice him doing anything incorrectly, I think was a big plus.
I was trying to, as you watch, and these are those games where it's, again, so many guys were out. I mean, pretty much the entire offense was out. Mike Gesicki, the only one who played, I think, of any substance offensively, a couple, 3 of the offensive linemen. But, your newcomers didn't play on offense. Obviously, again, no Tua. Defensively, you had a lot of guys out. You're going to play vanilla style. But I thought, the areas you could have been critical are the areas that every head coach in the preseason knows about. And that's, number one, is who you play. If you sit guys out, or those guys, when are you going to play Tua? Those are tough decisions. How much are you going to play guys? I mentioned Gesicki. Gesicki was the one guy who played, and I think a lot of people kind of said, okay, what does that mean for him in this picture when everybody else is out, but you play Gesicki? And then other guys, Jalen Phillips played a couple series. Here's your star pass rusher, a young guy who you're building around. Again, if he got hurt, then all of a sudden those questions come. You had Trill Williams, who's been spectacular in camp, and it's such an area. If there's an area where you look at the Dolphins, you say, okay, the depth at cornerback, and at every team on a 53-man roster, you're going to have depth issues at some position. Losing Trill Williams hurts, but you can't blame Mike McDaniel and say, oh, why were you playing Trill Williams in the fourth quarter? You got to play somebody. You got to put people on the field for an entire 4 quarters. So it's just bad luck that he got hurt. So I look at it as I thought he made the best decisions he could for a team from a personnel standpoint for a first game and trying to be careful with guys. And I thought his offense, Clay, I thought you saw a little glimpse of why chunk yards and big plays and deception and the ability to get guys in the open field and quarterback and movement, even off the first play from Skylar Thompson to Gesicki, I thought it was just a sign. Look, it's vanilla. You're not going to show too much. They also ran a reverse early in the game that didn't work. But again, these are little things that I think you could gauge from him. And you can see that he's going to be the kind of coach that he's going to come out aggressive. He's going to come out fast. And when you have Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle out there, and you have Raheem Mostert and Chase Edmonds, and obviously Tua under center will be a little bit different. But I overall was impressed. And look, let's go to Skylar Thompson. I think he's the guy that everybody's talking about, right? Everybody's saying, like, who is Skylar Thompson, the 7th-round pick from Kansas State? And what'd you think of it? And my bottom line is this: is if he looked pretty darn good to me, you look at a Mike McDaniel offense and he made Skylar Thompson look pretty good, pretty comfortable, then I think the human nature thing to do is, number one, is you're impressed for Skylar Thompson and his potential maybe a backup one day in the league, but also what it could mean for Tua. Like, is Tua going to look this comfortable? Is that the effect of Mike McDaniel?
Well, and I think that's probably the thing that you're most encouraged by is, hey, you've got this new system where everybody is there learning, and even a rookie, a 7th-round pick out of Kansas State, was able to go out there and efficiently execute the offense. And I know that's a cliche to say, but man, if you can communicate everything that you need done to a rookie in his first ever NFL camp, that's it. Now look, Skylar Thompson is somebody, he's not your typical rookie. He's somebody who, like, if you look back, and I remember watching him at Kansas State in particular, the 2 upset wins over Oklahoma. I remember him thinking that, man, this guy is a gamer, obviously very smart, but I never looked at him and said, oh, that's an NFL quarterback.
No.
I looked at him on Saturday night, and I'm thinking,
he looked very comfortable.
That's an NFL quarterback. And no, not an all-pro starting caliber quarterback, but somebody that years down the road, you'd be like, okay. So all that to say that, yeah, man, he comes in and immediately he's able to take what he's learned from not just Mike McDaniel, but also he spoke very, very highly of Teddy Bridgewater and also Tua Tagovailoa and what they've been able to impart to him. I thought it spoke very, very highly, but I also think that, and Brian Baldinger did a good job of breaking this down on his Baldy's breakdowns, that what the Dolphins were able to do to scheme up a lot of chunk plays in the preseason when you're playing a lot of guys who aren't going to play in the regular season, that speaks to the scheme. And you're also going up against a pretty darn good defense as well in the Buccaneers. So, all that to say that, yeah, you don't want to take too much away from these games, but I think there's some things that you look at and you say, okay, let's see if this keeps going, because I think the signs are really positive early on.
And I think when you look at Skylar Thompson, you look around the league, what's the one thing that teams struggle with most? And that's when a quarterback, a starting quarterback or star quarterback, starting quarterback, whatever the case may be, when he goes down, how different it looks. And you could go to the extremes, like, Aaron Rodgers goes down if Jordan Love wasn't the same. And that's like from great to and then you look at cases of Jameis Winston and Daniel Jones, they go down. I mean, Daniel Jones is not a good quarterback, right? He's a very mediocre NFL quarterback, but he went down in the Giants offense with Mike Glennon. We saw them come to Hard Rock Stadium. It looked like a Pee Wee League offense.
Yep.
The difference between a starting quarterback and the NFL backup on a lot of teams is significant.
Yes.
Look, the Dolphins are set with Teddy Bridgewater. They're very fortunate to have a proven QB. But my point with Skylar Thompson is, if you could develop Skylar Thompson, your number 3 quarterback now, if you put him on the 53, but to eventually have a guy who is a solid backup that you could trust in a pinch to put in, that's why the Ryan Fitzpatricks of the world last a decade plus. That's why the Colt McCoys of the world are still in the NFL. I mean, it's good. This is what the preseason is for. Even more so, obviously developing your current players and your core players is a lot of what camp has to do. But when you can find guys like this, if this is what Skylar Thompson turns out to be, I think that's a positive. I mean, you look at it as a 7th round pick, potentially as a backup quarterback, you take that any day of the week.
Well, and look, we like to compare what we see with the Dolphins to the teams that we follow closely that are our heart. I watched Ian Book for the Saints last night.
Oof, I'm sorry about that. Well, we saw him last year too with the Dolphins, against the Dolphins on that Monday night game.
I mean, and like against the Dolphins last year, you could have said, okay, well, man, I mean, everybody was out with COVID and this and this. No, that wasn't the excuse last time. Saints drafted him, I think, 4th round last year. It was mid-late round pick, whatever it was. But after a full year in the system, more than that at this point, and a higher draft pick than Skylar Thompson, I saw a lot more out of Skylar Thompson on Saturday night for the Dolphins than I've seen in over a year from Ian Book. And that's a 7th round pick in his first ever preseason game in the NFL. So, yeah, I think it's both of those things that we've talked about to kind of put a bow on the Skylar Thompson thing. It's, number one, it makes you encouraged by the system and the fact that however Mike McDaniel and his coaching staff is teaching that system, they were able to eloquently get it in the head of a rookie. But also, you got to feel pretty good that you spent a 7th round pick on a guy that showed a lot of promise the first time he stepped on an NFL field.
I agree. So that's the positive. The negative, obviously, True Williams getting hurt. We talked about that. You can't take big picture as to the other things. I think that's more what training camp's about. And look, we've talked about it on our shows on Local 10. We've talked about it on our social media, and I will talk about it now too, is that the offense has looked very comfortable in training camp. And it's been going against each other. But I thought in the joint practices, Tua specifically, you look at him sitting out, but the offense I think has shown signs of what they could be very early on. And when you look at, and specific Tua, he goes out there, he has the couple practices, Tom Brady there as well. Brady has the one practice, doesn't play in the game. But I think when you look at Tua's comfort level in camp so far, it is clear that as this goes on, he's getting more and more comfortable. And it's also clear with the weapons he has, Mike McDaniel is getting more and more comfortable to try to open things up. So the biggest step, I think, for not just this game, because it is just one preseason game and they didn't play 2 of these guys. There's 2 more to go. But I think overall as a camp, Clay, and I think you'll agree with me on this, I think there'll be a lot of signs that the Dolphins offense is really trending in the right direction. Cedric Wilson did play the other day. It was weird, by the way. I kept seeing Devontae Parker on the field, the ghost of Devontae Parker, because of that number 11. But I mean, I think big picture, you look at the depth they have in certain skill positions. You look at Lynn Bowden goes out there, catches it. He was impressive. He's probably your 5th wide receiver on your team. Myles Gaskin, who was a starter last year, may not even see this team. There is a lot there for this offense. And I think that as a Dolphin fan is what should get you excited as we get closer and closer to the season.
Bowden's a really interesting guy because I remember watching him at Kentucky. He destroyed Virginia Tech as a quarterback. And he's a guy who's just a football player. And with a guy like him, man, he's obviously got skills and he's got explosiveness. But you need a coach who can find a way to get him in a spot where he's comfortable. Enter Mike McDaniel. And, man, I'll tell you what, he jumped off the screen, Lynn Bowden did in that game. And it was because, like, you could tell that McDaniel found places where, whether it's finding a soft spot in the zone or it's getting him isolated against somebody that can't guard him. It's like, okay, well, I have things in mind where I can get him isolated in a spot where he can shine. And you saw him do that with Deebo Samuel, along with Kyle Shanahan in San Francisco. And there's just it brought me back to the thing that Sean Payton said this, and I think Mike McDaniel is the same way. It's, no, I don't have an offensive system. I have an offense where it's my job to find playmakers and then build spots, build plays that will highlight what they do well. So with Lynn Bowden, you see him go out there. It's like, oh, man, well, the guy's fast and explosive, and you find ways to get him the ball. Cedric Wilson, I was surprised to see him play in this game, and yet you can kind of see
play a lot, man. Yeah.
If you've got Tua throwing to Jalen Waddle and Tyreek Hill, and they're scaring the daylights out of opposing defenses, then here comes Cedric Wilson. I mean, so yeah.
As your number 3, that's impressive. That's some really quality depth. I mean, there's very few teams that have that kind of depth when your number 1 is maybe the best receiver in the NFL, certainly one of the best. Your number 2 is a rookie coming off a record-setting season. And your number 3 is a guy in Cedric Wilson who showed a lot of upside when he was in Dallas.
So yeah, it's the depth. And then it's also, you got a coach who knows how to use those guys' skills. So it's, you may have guys that may not be huge contributors other places, but man, you find the right coach who can put them in spots to succeed. And, again, I'm not going to take too much out of the game, but it was like, oh, okay. All right. Well, I like what I saw here. I will say this. I took more out of the reports from practice, the joint practices with the Buccaneers, relative to this year's Dolphins team, because you're talking about, okay, man, Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle were uncoverable in those practices. And it's, I mean, the Dolphins passing offense did really, really well. So I just think there are so many things from this week that if you're a Dolphins fan, no, you can't definitively say, man, we're on the right track. But they were signs. It's like, okay, if you were looking for positive signs, you got them this week.
Them. And as you mentioned, a lot of that has to do with kind of a full spectrum of training camp, not just one preseason game where a lot of guys didn't play. Now, you can also, there's always a negative. There's always a downside. There's always room for growth. And McDaniel himself said, look, it's not going to be perfect. The day that we play a perfect game is the day I probably leave football, because as a coach, you're always searching for perfection and you're never going to get it. You're always going to look for more and certain positions. And I think I referenced it earlier in the injury to Trill Williams. My gosh, if there's a position where the Dolphins did not need, you never want injuries anywhere. But I mean, to have it in a situation where, you have obviously Xavier Howard and Brian Jones. You look at or Byron Jones, excuse me. And then you look at Noah McNagany, the way he's been struggling, and to lose Trill Williams, who looked really good in camp. There is a concern, and I think it's a fair concern, that the depth at cornerback is an issue. It is. And I mentioned earlier about 53-man roster. You're not going to have a stacked units everywhere, but I do see the Dolphins in the position they're in now to have to go out and get a corner that maybe shakes free on a team, maybe a veteran, just a guy that I think can fill a spot with comfort. Maybe it's a guy with history with McDaniel, maybe a guy that McDaniel coached somewhere, was around in San Fran or whatever the case may be. Again,
are you saying they should call Richard Sherman right now? Is that the play?
Pick up the phone, call him right now. No, I mean, I think if you're going to go into the season, and I think that was an area where there was a little concern there already, even with the depth with Trill Williams healthy.
Yeah.
Noah McNagany is not getting better. I mean, it's just that's looking like, just a true bona fide bust. And you hope it's not the case, and he's still young enough to improve. But Clay, come on, you thought into this camp he would come in and, jobs on the line, opportunities on the line. That new coach has no connection to him. He doesn't have to keep him along. He doesn't have to have him here at part of the rotation. And he goes out and he's just, I mean, the teams are picking on him right off the bat.
Yeah.
Tampa was looking for him everywhere they looked. So there's a concern there. I think that's the one spot. Everything else, look, linebackers, all that stuff, those guys didn't play. I mentioned Jalen Phillips played a bit. You know what you've got there. Raekwon played a little. Christian Wilkins didn't. But I think you feel pretty good about spots on defense. And oh, by the way, the return of Jason Sanders. Mr. Automatic came back. He looked really good. And we laughed because 2 years ago he was automatic. Last year he struggled in a tough season. So those are little things, though, that you look at that as camp goes on, you kind of see what happens.
Yeah, and I think with Noah Igbenogany, they were picking on him during the game because they were able to pick on him all week in practice. It was like, all right, well, it worked.
They learned quickly. Yeah.
Yeah, and teams' actions always speak louder than words. So I don't expect to hear, oh, we feel really badly about our cornerback situation. But it wouldn't surprise me one bit if we see them make a move in the next couple of weeks, because you're right. Guys are going to shake free, excuse me, as far as like guys getting cut. But then you're also going to have teams that have guys that are a little bit better than the guys who are going to be cut. And if you can give up a 6th, 7th round pick, like a team will look at it as a win if they can give up a starting caliber corner. As opposed to cutting him, a team that's got a lot of corners, you know, like New Orleans has Bradley Roby. I mean, those are the types of teams that, man, they may end up taking a late round draft pick. So what you as fans see, Dolphins see it too. And so it wouldn't surprise me one bit if you start to hear that they're shaking the trees to see if they can trade one of these late round picks for somebody.
Final thought, it's been something that's been asked of me a bunch from Dolph fans, and I'll be honest with you, it's something that I'd like to ask Mike McDaniel this week out at practice, and I'm sure he will be asked. But how do you, Clay, weigh, especially with a new head coach and new system, playing time in the preseason for key guys over the risk of injury? And it's tough because I think Tua has to get some play in these games at some point, probably against the Raiders, I would guess, but still, you would like to see something, but of course you're worried about the injury situation. How would you balance that if you're Mike McDaniel? What do you think is the right mix?
Well, I mean, you saw what happened to Zach Wilson, and
he's out 2 to 4 weeks, right?
Yeah, and I was stunned that the next day Kansas City played Patrick Mahomes on that awful field in Chicago. And so what Mike McDaniel said, which I found really interesting, and he was speaking relative to some of the younger guys, some of the guys who maybe hadn't played in games. And he said, you know, the good part about playing a preseason game is, like, if guys make mistakes in preseason games that they weren't making on the practice field, then it's our job to get with them and say, look, that's no different. You're just under the law. His point being that the venue changes. The bright lights may be there, but you're still playing football. So I think in his mind, and I do think they'll get some snaps, but I would think in McDaniel's mind, it's, man, why would somebody like Tua, or better example, somebody like Xavier Howard, I mean, those guys, the venue shit isn't going to matter.
By the way, I don't think X plays at all in the preseason.
No,
I don't think. I just thought Tua might play a series or two. There is part of me that's old school that thinks the thought of a quarterback and a first team offense seeing the field for the first time in the opening regular season game is a little scary. Like, and you knock the rust off and keep it simple. A couple handoffs, a couple quick passes, see if you can get a little quick drive going, and that's, call it a night. But there is the risk, obviously. Look, you said it with Zach Wilson. We've seen it in other preseasons. I mean, we've seen players go down in preseason games that end their season, and that's a scary. Troy Williams is a perfect example. He makes a play, hurts his knee, he's done. And that's scary. But there's an old school part of me though that I just want to see the team just one or two possessions knock a little of that rust off, and you're getting so much work in camp, but it gets a different opponent on the field. I do think there is a difference, the venue and the situation. I do think there's a difference between training camp and practice against your own players and the level of playing another team, albeit in a preseason game, that I like to see.
Well, yeah, I mean, you want to know what it's like when a guy can hit you. And when the defensive end that's coming and crashing hard, like,
but not hit you too hard though. Don't hit him too hard though.
Yeah, but like when that threat is there, how do you operate? And it was certainly. I had no problem with them not playing in game one. I think the our view of what these preseason games are is different now, because used to it was like, all right, you don't play game one, you play a little game two, and then game three is the dress.
A whole half, and then the fourth game you don't play. There's only 3 now, though.
Yeah, so I don't know how that changes, but I would expect him to play at least a series or two coming up this weekend. But I think you're right. I don't think you play somebody like Xavier Howard, but I think the offense in particular, you want to get out there.
Good stuff. All right, there you go. So Dolphin fans happy to see some football. We're happy to chat some football. We'll continue to follow that. Obviously, the Dolphins preparation for the Raiders. We've got that. Heat off season so quiet.
So quiet.
Crickets chirping. So maybe
we're saying that right now. We're gonna wake up in the morning and there's gonna be a massive trade.
They're gonna have Donovan Mitchell or Kevin Durant or God knows what. So, but that's all the time we got from Miami Sports Pod. We'll be back next week with more chats of the Dolphins, and if anything else happens,